Good morning and welcome to Chai and Why. With me today is Bhaswati Mukherjee from the Department of Astronomy and Astrophysics at TIFR. Bhaswati is going to tell us about astrochemistry. So, Bhaswati, does chemistry happen in outer space as well? I thought it happens in test tubes.
Well, of course it does, because chemistry happens whenever you have two chemical species interacting with each other. So in test tubes you have them in real close proximity, but they are there in the outer space. So if you leave them and let them be on their own, they are going to find their partners and interact with them in, well, rather long time, but they would. So, and that's the beginning of astrochemistry.
So, in these clouds of gas and dust between stars, we have reactions happening which take millions of years and give us very interesting molecules. How do you detect them?
Well, it depends on what the molecules are. So whenever there is a molecule, so the molecules are rotating and or they are vibrating. So and if because of by some means you are able to make them vibrate faster or rotate faster, then eventually they would emit a photon or a light packet and come down to and then slow down in its motion, and that light packet can be detected, and depending on the energy of the light packet you choose your detector. If it has some energy to which our eyes are sensitive, we would use optical telescope, and if it is not, then we would use some other detectors which are sensitive to longer wavelengths of light.
So, Bhaswati, there are reactions happening in these clouds of gases and dust between stars that take millions of years to happen, perhaps. But how do we on Earth know that they are happening over there?
Well, for one, astronomers use telescopes, and actually these molecules are the ones which from time to time they would emit radiation in different wavelengths, and we astronomers build telescopes which are there on the Earth, as well as we send them up in satellites to observe those radiation. That's how we detect the molecules.
Wonderful. So join us for astrochemistry.
So I'm going to take you through a chemical voyage through the astronomical objects. So I already used some terms and terminologies which may not be very obvious to all of you, or the meanings may not be very obvious. So I'll try to take you through the steps of it and make you realize that indeed there is a lot of chemistry happening all around us, yes, that we know, and even beyond in the outer space. So the obvious question is, what is astrochemistry? And the way to understand is, the obvious answer is that it's a study of chemistry in space. Now astronomy, as you say, as you know it, is something which originated in mathematics. So people who were doing mathematics used to do astronomy to study the positions of astronomical objects, etc. So gradually it became a physics discipline where people tried to understand what those objects were and how what were the things happening there, because you see, astronomical objects give us a huge variety of physical objects which the physicists do not see in a normal laboratory, or we do not see all around us. We do not see so many conditions. So it's very sort of tempting. It was a tempting thing for a physicist to try and apply the physics principles to those objects. But slowly the astrophysicists, who were now equipped with mathematics and physics, they started to realize that, wait a minute, we actually also need chemistry in order for the physics part, to understand the physics part in the astronomical objects. So because this chemistry plays a significant role in deciding what will be the astronomical objects that we see. So formally speaking, if I were to give a formal definition of what astrochemistry is, it would be, it's a subject which studies the formation, destruction and excitation of molecules in astronomical environments and their influence on structure, dynamics, which deals with the all kinds of motions within those objects, and evolution of the objects. Of course, the physicists were initially interested in these three things, and they realized that they would need to understand the first part of it in order to be able to make, sort of crudely speaking, head or tails of it. But I find another definition of it, or a description of astrochemistry, a little bit more socially acceptable and sounds nice as well. It's a blending of astronomy and chemistry in which each area enriches the other in a mutually stimulating interaction. So, yes, astronomers need chemistry to understand the astronomical objects, but we would like to believe, and it is so, that the chemists also need astrochemistry, because this gives them a wonderful laboratory which they can never have in their, well, here on earth. So, going one step further, now what sort of triggered the, our interest in astrochemistry? So, I would sort of attribute it to two things. The first one was the discovery, well, we knew that there are planets like Earth around stars other than the sun, we knew of it, but it was for the first time in 1995 that an extrasolar planet, that is a planet belonging to some other star, was discovered. And of course, now we know more than 500 such planets exist. So, what sort of intrigued us and made us realize is that, well, so there are planets elsewhere, so it must not be something unique that has happened to us, it need not be, it could be that so similar things must be happening elsewhere. So, I am sure there is some, because at the end of it, it's like where did life come from, and such questions would come. So, and you need molecules for that. So, you need, so it must be sort of a universal phenomena that you have molecules everywhere else. So, that was one of the triggers. And the next trigger was the discovery of very complex molecules, not very well complex molecules other than the simple ones which I will talk about, mainly molecular hydrogen that you would naively expect to have everywhere. These complex molecules were detected in galaxies located at very large distances. So, if you know it or let me tell you then, large distances always means that they were formed at the very beginning, early stage of the formation of the universe. So, they tell us about our past. So, what it tells us is that discovery of those molecules, it tells us that these complex molecules were there even at the early stages of the universe. So, there must be something very universal about the thing, and since you have the molecules, and we of course, like it is not that we did not know anything about how the molecules work, and so that we know from terrestrial laboratories. So, we can, it is sort of a good guess and a good intuitive guess which has a solid scientific grounding, that it is possible, it is likely that those molecules actually play a very important role in how the universe looks today. So, now all of this chemistry or all of the molecules that we find today actually belong to for sort of a phase of the universe. What you would say is that it is the matter between the stars, it is in the matter between the stars. So, the most obvious astronomical objects that we see as a child are the stars, but then we see our night sky is, you have stars and nothing else, you have darkness, but actually the matter between the stars, there is a lot of matter between the stars, and it is called the interstellar medium, and I am going to call it ISM. So, many of you who are remotely interested in popular astronomy would be sort of familiar with these photos. So, this is the famous Horsehead Nebula. So, this is actually, this consists of the material between the stars, because the bright spots you see here are the stars, and what you see here is the dark, the horse-like structure is the matter, and it is because it is back illuminated. So, if you know a bit of, so it's like a silhouette that you see. And similarly, this is a wonderful picture from the Hubble Space Telescope, where you actually see these pillars. These were called famously known as the pillars of creation in the Eagle Nebula, and as you see at the top of it, the bright place there shows that there are very young stars forming in that. So, these are all optical images. So, if you sort of look at it in the right wavelengths, so somewhat longer wavelengths, and you probably have seen this picture as well. So, this is actually a much larger image than compared to that, although they look to be of the same size. So, this is what the interstellar matter looks like, and these are now called by astronomers as mountains of star formation. So, the interstellar space is filled with dilute gas. So, we will explain why it is dilute, and something which is called dust, which is a sort of a refractory material, and these two together are called the clouds. and it is in these clouds that stars form. So, the takeaway note from this is that you have a lot of material between the stars, and then they consist of gas and dust, and that is what we call loosely, I would be referring to as clouds, and these are the cradles of star formation. So as I said that there were two triggers for study of astrochemistry. So why should discovery of planets belonging to other stars sort of make us feel that, oh, we need to learn some chemistry? So the idea is that, so as I said, the stars form in the interstellar medium, so that is they are born in the clouds, and so once the star is formed, the star has a disk around it, and it is in that disk that planets and planetary systems are formed. Okay, so and what cannot form planets are actually what we see as comets. So it tells you a lot about the planet forming environment in other stars when you look at comets. So the comets that we see here on Earth, so they tell you about the sort of the solar planetary system itself. So the composition of it, and it tells you about the planetary atmosphere. Okay, the second thing I said was that we detected complex molecules at very large distances. So here what you see, so these are some kind of images that you keep seeing coming from astronomers. So this is basically what these are called false color images. So you have a color scale assigned to it. So the way you assign it is that if something is very bright, then it is red, and then so you have different colors, and so if it is not so bright, then finally it's blue, so it goes through green, yellow, etc. It depends on what color scale you choose. So here this is an image of say a far outer space, of the outer space, and just concentrate on the small dot here. So that is actually a galaxy which is very, very far away from us, and it's actually, for those who know what a redshift is, so just to impress you with the fact that it's at a redshift of 6.4, and redshift of 1 is kind of very normal, the thing we know well within redshift of 1. So what happened was that first of all this galaxy was detected, so one realized that, well, there were a lot of galaxies even in the early days of the universe. So once those galaxies were detected, people tried to see, well, did they have any molecules, and indeed they had. So this is a spectrum of a carbon monoxide, just forget whatever notations is written there, and this is a spectrum of singly ionized carbon. So yes, it has carbon monoxide already forming in the early days of the evolution of the universe. So what the message to take away from this is that astrochemistry actually started shortly after Big Bang. So it's there, it has been there ever since. So as I said, it's 99% of the interstellar medium is gas phase, and 1% is solid state. That solid state is what I am referring to as dust. So it's very minuscule in amount, but it has a far-fetched implication and bearing on what happens to the interstellar medium as such. The dust has a very strong influence on that. And you do see molecules everywhere. As I said, there are interstellar molecular clouds which can be diffuse or they can be dense. So we will soon see what we mean by diffuse and dense, like how diffuse is diffuse. And they are there in the star forming regions, of course in circumstellar envelopes, which is the envelope around a star. When a star grows old, it has a sort of pronounced envelope, and then that also has molecules. Molecules are there in the sunspots. Right on the sun, they are destroyed, but sunspots are somewhat colder, so you do see molecules on them. And of course, as I said, that you do see them everywhere, including the early universe. So this is a typical molecule forming environment. So when I say diffuse clouds, they have temperatures of 100 K. So 100 Kelvin. So 100 Kelvin is minus 273 degree Celsius. So just keep that in mind. So this is so they have temperatures of 100 Kelvin, and this is the number of particles per centimeter cube. Centimeter cube is 100. So when I say diffuse, it has only 100 particles in a centimeter cube area of volume. And when I say dense, the same numbers are more like, so the dense clouds are actually colder, so they have temperatures down to 10 Kelvin. So the one number which you all probably are aware of is the temperature of the cosmic microwave background radiation. So that is sort of, you say that 3 3 Kelvin. So that's sort of the coldest that it can get anywhere else in the universe. It cannot be below that. And so, but these cloud forming environments, when they are dense, they have temperatures like 10 to 100 Kelvin, and the number density, so the number of particles per unit volume is something like 10,000 to 10 to the power 8. So when we said dense clouds, we had something like 10 to the 8, but our atmosphere as we breathe in today, it's 10 to the 19. So we are actually living in a much more denser environment than one can ever encounter in the outer space. So this means that we have a laboratory which is very different from the terrestrial laboratory. So the universe as such, or the outer space, therefore gives us a laboratory which is very different from the terrestrial laboratories. And so if you have very few particles in a, say in the same volume, you would actually not see all the things that you are seeing when there are more of them. So this leads to an unusual chemistry, but then also so it is predominantly hydrogen that you see in the outer space, and with some amount of helium. So the size of these squares actually tell you the relative proportion of these elements. So you also have carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, but compared to hydrogen, they are just negligible. So they are very, very small amounts, which is very different from what we see here, right? Here on Earth, so we are the astronomers are encountered with a completely different chemical situation. So this is sort of fondly called the astronomer's periodic table. So in order to form a molecule, you need the atoms to interact, right? So, but if you look at it, so as I said that say some 10,000 particles in a cubic centimeter is a sort of a number which is a typical star forming environment. You expect to have one collision, by collision it's an interaction, in 1 month. So two atoms which are sort of freely floating in such an environment, they will come close to each other and sort of interact once in 1 month. So it's as rare as that, which is not at all true for your laboratory system. So that the laboratory that you have in your colleges or so. And the typical time scale for any chemical reaction to happen, so it's not only forming hydrogen molecule, but if you want to form anything beyond that, the time that it takes is something like 1/10 of a million year. And the time over which a star is formed is more like a million year. And the next thing to note is that an interstellar cloud, it is there for say suppose for only about 10 million years. Beyond that it just disperses, then it's reformed, then it forms. So there are various processes which actually destroy the molecular clouds. So what has happened here is that you have too few interactions, you have very long time scales for chemical interactions, and by then you would have stars forming and the molecular clouds dissipating. So you wouldn't expect any molecules to form. Well, the atoms are not interacting, how would you form molecules? But if you look at the outer space, more than 160 molecules, I mean 160 types of molecules in their various forms have been detected in the interstellar medium. So surprise, surprise. So what kind of molecules have been seen? So the ordinary Gharelu molecules like molecular hydrogen, carbon monoxide, water, ammonia, then some of the alcohols, quite enticing, are also there. So but then there are some common, but they are sort of more complex molecules. So you can have ethyl cyanide and then acetaldehyde and things like that. And the largest molecules which have been sort of very recently detected are the fullerenes. So they have some 60 carbon molecules put together, so C660 or 70, C60, C70, and there are a few exotic species. So you can find something like HCO plus, which is an ionized thing. So some radicals which you normally would never see in the normal conditions of our terrestrial laboratories. And then there are some other exotic species like linear carbon chains with 3 carbons, 4 carbons, and even negative ions have been detected. This is like C6H minus, so radicals are ions. So the astronomers went and asked the chemists, how do these molecules then form? We are able to detect so many of the molecules, now it's your job to explain to us how these molecules form. Well, we are not so mutually exclusive, we now work with the chemists, but it's just to sort of, it sounds better this way. So now if you look at the thing, so as I said that most of the interstellar medium is gas. And as I said that these are really ultra high vacuum. Vacuum means, so because if you are here, it's more like we have 10 to the power 19 particles in a cube of cubic centimeter of say gas, but you have at most 10 to the 8 molecules in a cubic centimeter of gas in the outer. But what you find is that, well, you can actually let the system be there, you do not disturb it because it is outer space, be there and take as long as it wants, and then eventually they will collide, right. They are just moving in random directions, it takes very long, but they will collide. So, if you wait for long time scales, then like 10 million years, then there will be some complex molecules forming, whether they are sufficient or not, that we will see. But we know that the molecular clouds live only for about 10 million years. So, by the time you have formed a complex molecule, your molecular cloud has dispersed. So, it can't be that those molecules were formed and we can observe them. So, then they are not there, where would you find them? So, what we see is that, so if you just have chemical reactions happening in the gaseous phase, you cannot really produce the large complex molecules within, say, the formation of a star, well, the time it takes to form a star, say 1,000,000 years, so which have been observed. So, you can see very complex molecules in, so what the takeaway thing from this is that so you cannot form in the gas phase or the large complex molecules that astronomers have observed. So, so the question still remains, how do the molecules still form? And the answer to it is with the help of the interstellar dust. At the very beginning I said that the interstellar medium has gas and dust, and the dust is only 1% of the gas, but the dust is really playing a huge role in deciding what the gas part of it would also look like. So, very crudely speaking, it is basically a typical dust grain, I would say. So, you have some graphites and silicates. So, graphite is some form of carbon, you know, and silicates are basically some rock like minerals. Their composition are sort of for the astronomical objects are well known. Well known means people have done studies to understand them, and they are sort of cold things. So, they are often coated with water ice. Why I say water ice? Because ice can be of anything. You can have sort of other molecules freezing onto it. So, then you have the ice of that molecule. So, this is H2O when frozen onto the dust surface. So, that is the water ice. So, this is the core and this is the mantle. The blue thing is the water ice. So, and the typical size of dust grains is more like it is of the order of the visual wavelength. So, it is like 500 nanometers or they are smaller. And for the curious mind, these dusts are formed in the evolved stages or in the envelopes. As I say, there are circumstellar envelopes. So, in the envelopes of the sort of evolved stars, I will not go into the details because I think that will be putting too many things in this talk, and then they are dispersed onto the interstellar medium. When the star actually, well, it may undergo a supernova and disperse or just give up the envelope itself to the interstellar medium. So, that is how the interstellar medium is enriched with the dust. But the dust has another functionality. The reason that we do not see the interstellar medium is due to the dust, because dust has a peculiar property, as I said, that it has a size which is comparable to the wavelength of the visual lights. So, what it effectively does is it blocks, it sort of absorbs. So, when the light of that radiation falls on a dust grain, it absorbs it and it just gets heated up. So, you do not see the light from that in that way, but because the dust has heated up, it gives off some heat. So, if you have a heat sensor which is like an infrared sensor, then you see that. But in the visual, the optical wavelengths, visual wavelengths to which your eyes are sensitive, you would not see it. And that is precisely the reason why the night sky would look black other than the stars. So, it is the space in between, there is dust has absorbed all the light in that wavelength. But if you are using a heat sensitive detector or a heat sensor, say some of you may be working with those things in a different field altogether. So that if you use that, then you would see that the night sky is really bright because you have all the heated up dust. Then you can see the emission from all the heated up dust. So now we will try to see. So as I said that the dust plays an important role in the formation of molecules. So suppose I want to make a hydrogen molecule by using 2 hydrogen atoms. So as I said that there are very few hydrogen atoms in a given volume of space. So, the chances of them colliding with each other, as we saw, is very less. So, the chances of two of them just making just colliding and sticking to each other and forming a molecule is practically nil, because from say a physics consideration, you need something else to take away the energy and the momentum. These are technical terms, but energy you would understand. So, there will be an energy generated when such a molecule forms. So, you would need something which would take away that energy. So, you need a third body. So, using just a two body collision to produce this, it would be very unlikely to form, it is very unlikely that you can form a hydrogen molecule that way. But on the other hand, if you have a dust surface, so dust actually provides sort of a sticky surface. So, you can have two hydrogen atoms hitting and sticking onto the dust grain, and then they can move along the surface of the dust grain. So, that is surface chemistry for those of you who are interested. So, then the dust there are various mechanisms by which that those molecules can move along the surface of the dust grain, and then they are sort of in a solvent like thing where they can actually meet and form the molecule. Now, let me draw your attention to few other facts. As I said, molecules need dust to form. Without dust, it is very difficult to form molecules. Secondly, molecular clouds form stars, but in order to form molecular clouds and then stars, you need the thing to be sufficiently cold. So, right after Big Bang, as you know, the temperature was very high. So, you need to cool it down sufficiently before you can think of forming structure like molecular clouds and let alone stars. The third fact is that it is not sufficient to have only atoms to sort of cool down something to the level where it can form structure. So, you actually need molecules. And the fourth thing, metals, if you remember, they are all the elements which are heavier than helium, which were not formed in Big Bang. So, these are the things which are formed in Big Bang. They can only be produced inside the stars. The stars actually have a sort of a nuclear factory in them, in which they produce more and more sort of heavier elements. So, you need the stars to form the metals, and the dust has carbon. So, carbon is not there in when Big Bang occurred. So, you cannot have dust. So, you need the stars to be formed in order to make carbon, but you cannot make the stars unless you have the molecules, because you need to cool down the thing sufficiently, and you cannot make the molecules unless you have the dust. So, if you could follow the sequence, I can repeat it for you if you want. So, it is basically a chicken and egg problem. So, you cannot have the molecules without the dust, and you cannot have the dust without the molecules. So, which came first? So, the way I am saying it is basically it is how the understanding of the astrophysicists grew. So, because you first of all you sort of right away say, oh no, these reactions are not possible, but then you are in sort of despair, in desperation you think of, okay, maybe something I have sort of ruled out actually works. So, then this chicken and egg problem is that how did the first hydrogen molecule form if there was no dust? So, then you go back and look at the reactions you had said, no, these two body reactions are not possible and things like that. So, this takes us to the early dust free universe chemistry. So, which is a completely different chemistry than what we see now or what we have seen later. So, I will just go through it. So, I think it will be sufficient for me to tell you that, okay, people are convinced that the mechanisms I am saying here, they are reasonable to account for the formation of molecule of hydrogen. So, indeed I have ruled out the two body molecular interaction, gas phase molecular interaction, but because that was based on how frequent or the rate of such reactions based on our terrestrial laboratory experiments. Like, so you do experiments in the labs to check out, okay, now I evacuate this thing further and further and further, then what is the time scale over which such reactions would occur. So, that is our expectation, but then you can have a situation which is not entirely, which you have not entirely reproduced in your laboratories. So, something else might be happening in the outer space, and that is what has happened, that basically if you have one of the hydrogen atoms in an excited state, I will not go into the details. For those of you who have some experience with it would probably understand, but take it from me, the others please take it from me, that it is actually possible to generate hydrogen molecules by making an excited hydrogen atom interact with a normal hydrogen atom. So, it produces an ionized hydrogen molecule, which then by sort of exchanges charge with another hydrogen atom to form the first hydrogen molecules. So, it might be complicated, but the bottom line is that you can have gas phase chemistry actually forming the first molecules. But and similarly, and later on when so after the Big Bang you had those things and then you form the first hydrogen molecule, but then the temperatures etc. change and then the chemical composition also somewhat change. So, you have one has sufficient amount of H minus in the environment. So, then you can think of another chemical process reaction in which hydrogen reacts, neutral hydrogen atom reacts with an ionized with an H minus and a hydrogen molecule is formed. So, as I said, a simple molecule, let us consider a simple molecule with 2 atoms. So, it is like you can consider it to be a dumbbell where you have a fixed rod. So, it can rotate, the dumbbell you can rotate it like this. So, depending on how it rotates, so well that is something sort of an advanced physics concept which is in quantum mechanics, it would have its energy is decided by that. So, how fast it rotates, but then of course this dumbbell, the joining thing, it is not rigid. So, it can, the molecules can, the atoms can actually vibrate. So, so it can vibrate faster or it can vibrate slower. So, depending on how it is vibrating, that its energy is decided. So, to put it sort of formally, so the molecules vibrate and or rotate at certain speeds. So, I would be particular about this certain speeds because that is decided by quantum mechanics. I will not go into the details, but to be correct I have to say it like this. So the thing is that a molecule can actually lower its speed. So, if it were rotating very fast, say for instance in this case, so you have bigger arrows, it was rotating fast, but then you can, so rotating fast means it has a higher energy. So, it can lower its speed by giving up some of the energy and that energy can go out in the form of radiation. So, and similarly for a molecule which is vibrating, it would be vibrating very fast so that it has a lot of energy in it. It can shed off some energy by giving out radiation and then vibrate slowly. And so, this radiation which is coming out, the wavelength of it depends on the amount by which the energy the energy content of the radiation given out or the amount by which the speed is reduced. So, the electromagnetic spectrum, in that you have, and the way they are distinguished from each other is what we call the wavelengths. So, you can have radiation which has longer wavelengths, you can have radiation which has shorter wavelengths. So, longer wavelengths are what are called, say what are the radio wavelengths. Then as we go sort of go to shorter wavelengths, then it is the microwave regime. You all have microwaves at home, so this microwave. Then we have infrared. So, as I said, that is a heat sensing part of it. So, all of us are actually radiating in the infrared as well. So, and then there is then we have visible. Visible is the one range of wavelengths to which our eyes are sensitive. And beyond that we have ultraviolet. You have heard that we receive our atmosphere blocks off a lot of ultraviolet from the sun. So, that is actually somewhat shorter wavelength, means it has higher energy radiation, and then we have X-ray and gamma ray. So, that is what this is all about. So, which are the radiations which penetrate the Earth's atmosphere? We know for sure that the UV does not penetrate, we would not like a lot of these things to penetrate. X-rays also do not penetrate. So, what you see is that yes, the radio wavelengths, they all penetrate the Earth's atmosphere. Microwave, a very small part of it, but most of it does not. Infrared, it does not. So, our atmosphere actually blocks off and it actually shields us. But so, as human beings, we should be grateful for the atmosphere shielding it against all these radiation. And then, so the visible part, we have a window. So, that is why we are there, otherwise we would not be seeing each other, and there are a lot of other things. And then beyond the visible, none of it reaches the Earth's atmosphere or crosses the Earth's atmosphere. So, you cannot have a telescope which is sensitive to any of these wavelengths. You cannot build it on this Earth's surface and expect to see something coming from say a distant star or a distant astronomical object. So, that is and the so the radiation coming out of the molecules, which we call the spectral lines. You all know about the term spectrum. So, these spectral lines, just to know that most of them fall in this microwave regime. So, they are in the infrared. So, So, there are some other certain sort of fine naming conventions which astronomers use, submillimeter and millimeter. So, these are all put together in the microwave part of it and in the radio regime. So, these are the wavelengths in which most of the molecules emit. So, we have to, so depending on whether it penetrates the Earth's atmosphere or not, we have to build our telescopes at the right place. So, the telescopes which are located on the Earth are called ground based observatories. So, you can have you can build a telescope. This is a single telescope. It is a very large telescope. If you have some idea about what it has a diameter of 30 meters. So, it is a very large telescope. So, it is very large for a single dish. So, this is a 30-meter telescope. It's a you can have a single, these are called single dish telescopes, but you can build multiple of them. That actually gives you a lot of advantage. And so, this telescope, the first telescope is in Spain, and the second one is actually in India. This is called the Giant Meter Wave Radio Telescope. It is in Pune. Actually, the radio astronomy group of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research runs it. So, it is in a place called Khodad, very close to Pune. The institute is in Pune, but they run the telescope there. So, here you have there are certain advantages of using multiple telescopes, which I will not go into. So, it's these are called interferometers, and the latest of them all, here you see a large large number of telescopes. This is something, it's basically still under construction. So, this is a large array of telescopes which are sensitive to the millimeter wavelengths. Millimeter means the wavelength of the radiation is of the order of 1 or 2 millimeters. So, these are the instruments which will be very useful to study mostly the more distant objects with the better to see and sort of decipher one object from the other much better. So, but these are as far as you can do on the ground, but if you remember, none of the infrared actually passes through the Earth's atmosphere. So, you actually need space based observatory. So, there you build a telescope and you put it in a satellite and then you move send it to the send it to the space. So, this was the first of in the series which actually looked for water and molecular oxygen in the interstellar medium. Then there is a Spitzer Space Telescope. It is actually still functional, but not to the full to its full capacity. And the latest and the most, I think, the fabulous of them all is the Herschel Space Observatory. It is still observing, and it has given a huge boost to the field of astrochemistry by observing a large number of molecules. So, what they see is, so this is a typical spectrum observed from a star forming cloud. Now, I want you first to concentrate on the top panel. So, here you see that okay, you have these spikes, these are actually spectral lines from, so you actually observe over a certain frequency or wavelength range as you see. So, this is the wavelength is around 2 millimeters. So, you see a lot of lines and maybe it looks like a noisy spectrum, right, but not really. If I just blow up, it is the same spectrum blown up. Here you see I have gone from 0 to 60, but here it goes from 0 to 20. So, I have just zoomed in this part of it. So, actually I do see a lot more lines. If I do the same exercise and just zoom in the 0 to 3 part, I see a lot more lines. So, it is actually packed with spectral lines, and all these spectral lines have very important information about what is happening to the molecule, and so that happening, and what happens to the molecule determines or is determined by the conditions that we the astrophysicists are interested in knowing, like what kind of temperatures, densities, and what kind of molecules actually exist there. So, and I would like to leave this one on because this sort of tells you the nice cycle that the interstellar medium goes through. It enriches itself in the when it forms into stars, and then the stars actually forms planets, and then it actually further enriches itself chemically, and then it goes back through the stellar outflows into the once again the interstellar medium. So, we actually the interstellar medium is slowly evolving to be more and more complex, and that is what makes it so unique. And we hope that it will be possible to identify the means or the reactions which would contribute to something which would eventually give rise to molecules which contribute to the making of life. Thank you.